Have you ever heard of a place built to heal, but where real-life events turned hope into struggle? A building so big it housed thousands of people over more than a century. Inside, the walls witnessed stories few have ever told. Doctors tried to help, but the reality of this place was far harsher than anyone expected. This is the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, a real institution where hope and fear lived side by side. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, give this video a like, and share your thoughts in the comments, because the story you're about to hear is not fiction, it really happened. Deep in the hills of West Virginia stands one of the largest hand-cut stone buildings in America, built to heal minds, but destined to hold more secrets than anyone could imagine. Construction began in 1858 along the West Fork River with a grand ambition, a building designed to house and care for people suffering from mental illness. The architect followed the Kirkbride plan, a philosophy that believed patients could recover when surrounded by sunlight, fresh air, and structured surroundings. Windows lined every wall, hallways stretched endlessly, and the sprawling grounds included gardens and farmland where patients could work, heal, and find moments of peace. The Civil War interrupted construction. Soldiers marched across the unfinished grounds, and materials were taken for the war effort. Despite the delays, the doors opened in 1864 as Weston State Hospital, welcoming the first patients into a space built for hope. Those early years carried a sense of cautious optimism. Patients tended gardens, worked on farms, created crafts, and attended small celebrations. The architecture encouraged light and openness, and for a time, the asylum seemed to succeed in its mission. Families visiting the asylum could glimpse laughter, dances, and small joys, though the weight of its purpose was already growing heavier. The building was originally designed to hold about 250 patients, but the population quickly grew beyond its intended capacity. By 1880, over 700 patients lived within its walls. Mental illness at the time was broadly defined, including grief, anxiety, social defiance, or even political disagreement. The asylum became a place where countless types of struggles intersected under one roof, and every additional patient stretched the building's promise of safety and healing thinner. Some patients recalled moments of joy and hope, while others began to sense the walls closing in, the corridors stretching endlessly, and the quiet tension that seemed to seep into every room. Even in these early years, life inside the asylum was a mixture of light and shadow. Patients worked on farms, crafted items, and sometimes gathered for celebrations or holiday events. The environment encouraged activity, but it could not erase the sense of confinement, the weight of numbers slowly pressing against every corridor. Staff members worked hard to maintain order and provide care, but the balance between healing and control was fragile. Every day, the building held both human hope and human suffering, a duality that would grow more pronounced in the years to come. As the population continued to rise, the building's original design was tested. Rooms meant for a few patients began to house more, hallways became crowded, and even the spacious wings felt the strain of so many lives. While the intention had always been to promote recovery through light, air, and structured routines, the reality of numbers created tension that could be felt by everyone inside. Patients adapted as best they could, finding companionship, forming routines, or quietly coping with the pressure around them. Staff did what they could to provide care, but the growing population was a force beyond control, and the building silently absorbed the stress of every life it contained. The early therapies and daily routines reflected a hope that recovery was possible. Patients were encouraged to participate in farming, crafts, and social activities. These moments of normalcy created glimpses of optimism, though they were always set against the backdrop of a building that was already showing the first signs of strain. The stone walls and long corridors held the echoes of laughter and whispers alike, and even small events carried weight when the population was so high and resources stretched thin. The asylum was a living, breathing system, filled with both potential and tension, a microcosm of human resilience under pressure. By the end of the 19th century, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum had established itself as a place of both hope and challenge. It had welcomed hundreds of lives, each with its own story of struggle and resilience. The vision of light, air, and structured care remained, but the reality of growing numbers, broad definitions of mental illness, and limited resources had begun to test that vision. Within these walls, early attempts at healing were mixed with the strain of overcrowding, creating a tension that would continue to define life inside the building for decades to come. Every hallway, every room, and every patient carried the weight of the asylum's ambition and its early trials, laying the foundation for the stories that would follow in the years ahead. By the early 20th century, the asylum had grown far beyond its original design. What had once been a building for 250 patients now held over 1,000, and the numbers continued to climb. Hallways that were meant to allow light and movement became crowded dormitories, and rooms designed for 1 or 2 patients were forced to hold many more. Staff struggled to maintain routines and provide care, but the sheer volume of people made every day a challenge. The building's walls, meant to nurture recovery, now absorbed tension, fatigue, and the quiet despair of those living within. As overcrowding increased, the environment shifted from one of hope to one of containment. Resources became scarce, medical care stretched thin, and the ideal of recovery often gave way to the practical need to manage numbers. Patients were confined to whatever space could be found, and the crowded wings amplified stress, confusion, and fear. Despite this, some semblance of routine remained. Patients continued to work on crafts, tend gardens, or participate in group activities when possible. But the strain was palpable, and the building itself seemed to groan under the weight of so many lives pressed into its stone walls. Medical practices of the era added to the tension inside the asylum. While some treatments reflected the best understanding of the time, others were harsh by today's standards. Isolation rooms were used to manage behavior. Restraints were employed when patients became agitated, and therapies like electroconvulsive treatment and lobotomies were introduced as experiments in care. Lives were changed in ways that could not always be reversed, and the very methods intended to help sometimes caused fear, confusion, or harm. Yet the staff worked tirelessly, balancing limited knowledge, scarce resources, and the growing pressures of overcrowding, trying to preserve some sense of care in an increasingly strained environment. Individual stories illustrate the human side of this struggle. Some patients arrived with hope and left changed, their days measured by routines and treatments that were sometimes confusing or frightening. Others formed bonds with staff or fellow patients, moments of connection that offered small relief amid the overwhelming conditions. The asylum held countless lives, each with its own story, each subject to the ebb and flow of care and neglect. Records show moments of compassion, brief glimpses of joy, and acts of kindness that punctuated the otherwise challenging environment. Despite the challenges, the building itself remained a symbol of ambition. Its wings stretched endlessly, designed to allow light and air, and for those who could find comfort in structure, the architecture provided a semblance of stability. But the very design that was meant to heal also revealed the reality of strain. Long corridors and large rooms, once empty, were filled with dozens of patients. Staff-to-patient ratios fell, resources became scarce, and the human impact of overcrowding became unavoidable. What had been a sanctuary was now a place where survival, routine, and order became the primary focus. By the mid-20th century, patient numbers peaked at roughly 2,600, more than 10 times what the building had originally been designed to hold. Every hallway, every room, every wing bore witness to human endurance and struggle. The building absorbed tension, despair, and fleeting moments of hope alike, silently recording the lives of everyone who passed through its doors. Treatments, routines, and daily life coexisted with fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, creating an atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. The walls contained countless stories, both tragic and ordinary, each contributing to the legacy of the institution. Yet life persisted. Some patients adapted, forming friendships and small routines within the crowded conditions. Staff continued their work, balancing compassion with the impossible demands of numbers and resources. The asylum, despite its struggles, remained a place where human stories unfolded every day, a microcosm of endurance, suffering, and resilience. The building itself, massive and silent, seemed to hold every whisper, every cry, and every quiet act of perseverance. Even in its heaviest moments, it retained a strange, tense energy, a reminder of what happens when ambition meets the realities of human need. By the late 20th century, social and medical perspectives on mental health began to change. Large institutions like the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum came under scrutiny. New approaches emphasized community care, outpatient treatment, and reducing overcrowding. The once grand halls, which had been home to thousands of patients over decades, were now seen as outdated and unsustainable. Resources were redirected, staff numbers shifted, and the building's days as an active institution were numbered. The sense of constant motion that had defined life inside its walls began to slow, replaced by uncertainty about what the future would hold. In 1994, after over 130 years of operation, the asylum officially closed. The closure marked the end of a long era in American mental health care, but it did not erase the thousands of lives that had passed through its doors. Patient records, now preserved in archives, reveal the names, ages, diagnoses, and stories of countless individuals, some whose families never returned and some whose lives ended within the walls of the institution. Unclaimed bodies were buried nearby, leaving silent markers of the lives that had been both cared for and confined within the massive stone structure. These records provide a factual window into the realities of institutional care over more than a century. Even after closure, the building continued to command attention. Its massive hand-cut stone walls and long, labyrinthine corridors remained intact, standing as a reminder of both the ambition and the limitations of the past. Tours and educational programs now allow visitors to learn about the history of the asylum, the lives of the patients, and the medical practices of earlier eras. The site is preserved as a historical landmark, offering insight into how mental health care evolved and the human stories that shaped its history. It is a place where architecture, history, and human experience intersect, leaving a powerful impression on anyone who walks its halls. Despite its historical significance, the asylum has also gained a reputation for being haunted. Visitors and staff have reported unusual sounds, shadows, and unexplained sensations throughout the building. These stories are treated as cultural context rather than verified fact, but they underscore the lingering impression of so many lives lived in close quarters over decades. The atmosphere of the building, shaped by both its architecture and its history, continues to inspire curiosity, speculation, and reflection about the people who once walked its corridors. The lessons of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum extend far beyond its walls. It reflects the evolution of mental health care in the United States, from early ideals of humane treatment to the challenges of overcrowding and outdated methods. It demonstrates the consequences of ambition when human need exceeds resources and the limits of design. Most importantly, it emphasizes the human stories behind the stone and mortar, stories of resilience, struggle, adaptation, and sometimes loss. Every hallway and every wing is a testament to the endurance of those who lived, worked, and persevered within the institution. Walking through the building today, one can sense both the history and the weight of the past. The walls are silent, yet they hold the echoes of decades of lives intertwined, patients and staff, hope and despair, order and chaos. The architecture, once meant to heal, now stands as a monument to ambition, human endurance, and the complex legacy of mental health care. Even in its quiet state, the building invites reflection, asking visitors to consider what it must have been like to live, work, and survive within its massive stone walls. And yet, for all its historical lessons and preserved corridors, there remains an undeniable tension. The building's silence is not empty. It seems to carry the memory of thousands of lives, the faint traces of struggles, and fleeting joys, and the quiet weight of history pressing on anyone who enters. Some say that walking through the halls is like stepping into the past, where shadows linger and stories are never fully gone. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is more than a building. It is a witness, a keeper of human experience, a place where hope, struggle, and the enduring complexity of life remain palpable, even decades after the last patient departed. As we leave the halls of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum behind, the weight of its history stays with us. The building reminds us of the delicate balance between care and control, ambition and reality, hope and despair. Every stone, every corridor, and every silent room carries echoes of lives lived, struggles endured, and resilience found. It challenges us to reflect on how society treats its most vulnerable and what lessons can be learned from the past. Even today, standing in its shadow, one can feel the lingering presence of those who came before, their stories etched into the walls, reminding us that history is never truly silent. The asylum endures as a monument, not only to the challenges of mental health care, but to the human spirit that navigated its corridors for over a century, leaving a legacy that continues to provoke thought, curiosity, and a deep sense of respect for the lives it contained. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more real-life horror stories that uncover the dark corners of history. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter, and share this video to keep their stories alive. Because sometimes, the past isn't gone, it's just waiting to be heard.